The bride was not crying when the groom left her at the altar. That was the part I would remember for the rest of my life. Not the white flowers, not the ocean wind pressing against the stained glass windows, not the way the whole church seemed to hold its breath. I would remember Grace Bennett standing in the center of that old seaside church in Charleston, South Carolina, with her mother's wedding dress trembling around her ankles, and her chin lifted as if dignity were the only thing she had left to wear. I should not have been there. At least, that was what I told myself when I took a seat near the back, in a pew polished smooth by generations of Sunday hands. I was not family. I was not one of Caleb Morrison's polished friends from law school. I was not rich enough to belong among the men in tailored suits, or charming enough to blend in with the guests who spoke in low, graceful voices about real estate, court cases, charity galas, and old Charleston names. I was just Ethan Walker, the man who fixed broken chairs. My workshop sat 3 streets away from the historic district, tucked between a narrow alley and a coffee shop that smelled of cinnamon every morning. The sign above my door read, Walker Restoration, hand-painted in faded navy letters. I restored antique tables, repaired cracked cabinets, rebuilt porch swings, and coaxed life back into furniture other people had given up on. Most days, I preferred wood to people. Wood did not ask questions. Wood did not pity you. Wood did not look at the burn scars on your left hand and wonder what fire had taken from you. It simply waited, patient, honest. If you respected its grain, if you moved slowly enough, even something damaged could become useful again. Grace had first come to my shop on a rainy Tuesday afternoon with a broken child-sized chair in her arms. The bell above my door had chimed, and I looked up from sanding the leg of an old cedar chest. She stood in the doorway, with drops of rain shining in her brown hair, a pale blue cardigan buttoned over a floral dress, and an apologetic smile that seemed too soft for the gray weather outside. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. One of my students leaned back too far, and this chair lost the battle. I glanced at the chair, then at her. Chairs usually do. She laughed, not loudly but warmly, like a match being struck in a dark room. That was Grace Bennett. Warm without trying to be, kind without needing applause. She taught 2nd grade at a small elementary school near the Battery, and over the next few months, she brought me the kind of things most people would have thrown away. A little bookshelf with a split side, a music box that belonged to a girl in her class, a wooden alphabet puzzle missing 2 letters, a teacher's rocking chair with 1 loose arm. Every time I fixed something for her, she thanked me as if I had done more than tighten screws and replace hinges. Sometimes she left handwritten cards on my workbench. "Mr. Walker, thank you for saving our reading chair. The children have voted to name it Captain Rockwell." Or, "Ethan, Lily says the music box sounds like a tiny angel practicing piano. Thank you for giving it back to her." Once, she brought me an apple pie wrapped in a kitchen towel. "I made too much," she said. I looked at the pie, then at her. "You made an entire pie by accident?" Her cheeks turned pink. "Maybe I made it on purpose." That was the closest I ever came to telling her she was the first good thing I had noticed in years. But Grace wore a diamond ring. Caleb Morrison had given it to her, and everyone in Charleston seemed to know about it. Caleb was handsome in the way men are handsome when life has never refused them anything. Smooth, dark hair, perfect smile, clean hands, expensive watch. He came from money, spoke like a man used to being believed, and carried himself as if every room had been built for his entrance. The first time he came to my workshop, he looked around as though the sawdust might stain his shoes. "Grace says you do decent work," he said, resting one hand on the counter. Grace stood beside him, her smile smaller than usual. Ethan restored the classroom bookcase. "The children love it." Caleb glanced at me. "Well, that is nice. She has always cared too much about sentimental things." I remember the way Grace lowered her eyes. I remember the way my hands curled around the rag I was holding. But I said nothing. A man like me had no right to speak into the life of a woman promised to another man. I knew that. I lived by rules because rules kept me from falling apart. Open the shop at 7, close at 6. Sand with the grain. Never touch liquor before dark. Never enter the burned room unless necessary. Never imagine a future that had already died once. Before Grace, there had been Olivia Reed. Olivia had loved old houses, wildflowers, and making plans on napkins. We had bought a small wooden house on the edge of Charleston, the kind with a sagging porch, cracked windows, and a giant live oak in the yard covered in Spanish moss. She said it had tired bones but a loyal heart. We were going to fix it together. Then came the fire. People always think grief is loud. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it screams through your body until your throat turns raw. But the grief that stays is quiet. It sits beside you at breakfast. It follows you into the workshop. It waits in the smell of smoke that is no longer there. It turns every unfinished room into a question you cannot answer. Olivia died before we could make that house a home. Afterward, I kept working because work was the only thing that did not ask me to heal. I restored other people's memories while mine gathered dust behind a closed door. Then Grace Bennett walked in with a broken chair and made the air feel different. That was why I accepted the wedding invitation when she brought it to my shop 2 weeks before the ceremony. She held the cream-colored envelope in both hands. "You do not have to come," she said quickly. "I know weddings can be long and uncomfortable, but the children insisted I invite the man who saved Captain Rockwell." I took the envelope. Her name and Caleb's were written in gold. "Grace Bennett and Caleb Morrison request the honor of your presence." Honor. I almost handed it back. Instead, I said, "Thank you." She smiled, and for one foolish second, I let myself imagine that her smile meant something more than kindness. The wedding day arrived bright and blue, the kind of Charleston afternoon tourists take pictures of and locals pretend not to notice. The church stood near the water, old and pale, with a steeple that cut into the sky. Sea wind moved through the palm trees. White ribbons fluttered along the iron fence. Inside, the pews were filled with guests, flowers, whispers, and the soft notes of a piano. Grace walked down the aisle alone. Her father had died years earlier, someone near me whispered, so she carried herself forward with both hands around a small bouquet of white roses. Her dress was simple, old-fashioned, and beautiful. Later I learned it had belonged to her mother. In that moment, all I knew was that when she passed my pew, the air seemed to still. Caleb was not at the altar. At first, people smiled politely, pretending not to notice. A delayed groom was not a disaster. A man could be stuck in traffic, caught on a call, held up by some last-minute emergency. His mother whispered sharply to his father. The minister cleared his throat. The pianist repeated the same gentle passage until the melody began to feel thin. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 40. Grace stood near the altar, bouquet in hand, her shoulders straight. Her bridesmaids shifted behind her, faces pale. Someone in the third row began recording with a phone. I saw it happen. A small black screen lifted like a weapon. At 53 minutes, Grace's phone buzzed in the hand of her maid of honor. The woman looked at the screen and went white. Grace took the phone from her. I could not read the message from where I sat, but I saw the moment it entered her, not like a slap, like a blade sliding between ribs. Later, the words would spread through the church in pieces. Caleb had gone to New York. There was an opportunity with a senior partner. There was a daughter of that partner. He was sorry. He could not marry Grace. He hoped she would understand. The whispers began slowly, then grew teeth. Oh, that poor girl. Did he really leave? Someone should stop filming. Maybe there was another woman. Maybe he found out something. Grace did not move. Her face had gone pale, but she did not collapse. She looked out at the rows of people who had come to witness her happiness and were now witnessing her humiliation. Her students sat near the front with their parents, wide-eyed and silent, clutching little paper programs in their hands. That was what broke me. Not Caleb's cruelty, not the gossip, not the phones. It was the way Grace looked at those children and tried to smile, as if even in the worst moment of her life, she wanted to protect them from seeing how deeply a person could be hurt. My hands began to shake. For 7 years, I had believed there was nothing left in me that could stand up quickly. Fire had taught me the terrible cost of being too late. I could not save Olivia. I could not reach her through the smoke. I could not undo the sound of sirens or the empty space she left behind. But Grace was standing there now, alive, alone, being turned into a story people would tell over dinner. Before I understood what I was doing, I stood. The church quieted in uneven waves. Heads turned. Someone whispered my name, though I did not know how they knew it. My old suit pulled tight across my shoulders as I stepped into the aisle. I could feel every eye on me, every polished guest wondering who the man with scarred hands thought he was. I walked toward Grace, not fast, not dramatic. I was not a hero. I was a carpenter with grief under his ribs and sawdust still caught beneath one fingernail. When I reached her, she looked at me as if she could not quite understand why I was there. I kept my voice low enough for her first, then steady enough for the church. "Grace," I said, "if today you need someone to walk you out of this pain with respect, I will stand here. I do not need you to love me. I do not need you to promise me anything. I only know you should not have to leave this place as a joke." Her lips parted, her eyes filled, but still she did not cry. I offered my hand. "This does not have to be a wedding," I said. "It can be a promise in front of the people who matter, a promise that you are not abandoned, a promise that your worth did not leave with him." For a moment, all I heard was the ocean wind pressing against the church walls. Then Grace looked down at my hand, and slowly, with everyone watching, she placed her trembling fingers in mine. Grace's hand was cold in mine. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The whole church seemed frozen around us, suspended between scandal and disbelief. I could hear the waves somewhere beyond the old walls, breaking softly against the harbor rocks. I could hear the tiny click of someone lowering a phone. I could hear Grace breathing, shallow and uneven, like she was trying to keep herself from shattering in front of everyone. The minister looked at me, then at Grace. He was an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, and I think he understood before anyone else did that this was not a romantic gesture. Not really. Not yet. It was a lifeline. Grace squeezed my hand once so lightly I almost missed it. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say much," I answered. "Only what is true." The minister stepped closer. His voice was gentle when he asked, "Miss Bennett, what would you like to do?" Grace looked back at the guests. Her mother sat in the front pew, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears running silently down her face. Caleb's parents looked stiff and furious, as if their son's cruelty had somehow become an inconvenience to them. Grace's former students sat in a small cluster, eyes wide, faces confused, and frightened by a grown-up world that had suddenly shown its worst manners. Then Grace lifted her chin. "I would like," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "to thank everyone who came here because they believed they were celebrating love." The church went completely silent. Grace kept holding my hand. "I do not know what today is anymore," she continued, "but I know what it is not. It is not the day my life ends. It is not the day my value is decided by a man who chose not to stand beside me. And it is not the day I leave this room ashamed of something I did not do." A quiet sob came from somewhere behind us. Grace turned toward me then, and for the first time since the message had arrived, her face softened with something like relief. "Ethan Walker has offered to walk me out of here with dignity," she said. "I accept." The minister nodded slowly. "Then perhaps we can make this a blessing instead of a ceremony." He did not speak of marriage. He did not pretend we were about to become husband and wife in the eyes of the law or the church. He simply placed one weathered hand over ours and said a prayer for courage, for healing, for the strength to survive public heartbreak without letting it poison the soul. I was not a man who prayed much anymore, but that day I bowed my head. When the prayer ended, Grace turned toward the aisle. I walked beside her, not ahead of her, not pulling her, not claiming her, just beside her. The guests rose slowly as we passed. Some looked ashamed, some looked moved, some looked hungry for gossip, and I knew by sunset half of Charleston would have its own version of what happened. But Grace did not look down. Near the front, a little girl with blonde pigtails reached out from the pew. "Miss Bennett?" Grace stopped. The girl held up a folded piece of paper from her program as if it were the only gift she had. "You are still pretty." Grace's mouth trembled. She bent down, still in her wedding dress, and hugged the child. "Thank you, Lily," she whispered. Outside, the air smelled of salt, jasmine, and rain that had not yet fallen. The church steps were lined with white petals that the flower girls had scattered before everything went wrong. Grace stood among them, blinking in the afternoon light. For a moment, I did not know what to do with her. That may sound strange. I had walked her out. I had spoken words I could not take back. But once the doors closed behind us and the church swallowed the whispers, Grace was no longer a bride abandoned in front of a crowd. She was a woman whose life had just split open. Her mother came out first. She wrapped her arms around Grace, and Grace finally began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just with the exhausted grief of someone who had been holding herself upright by force. "I'm sorry," Grace kept saying. "I'm so sorry." Her mother held her face. "No, baby, you have nothing to apologize for." I stepped back, giving them space. That was when Caleb's father approached me. Robert Morrison was a tall man in an expensive gray suit. He looked at my old jacket, my rough hands, and the scar that curled near my thumb. "You have made this worse," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "Your son did that." His jaw tightened. "This is a private family matter." "No, sir," I said. "It became public when he left her standing in front of 100 people." He leaned closer. "You do not know what you have stepped into." I almost laughed, but there was no humor in me. "I have stepped into a doorway so she could walk through it without being crushed. That is all." He looked past me at Grace, then back again. "People will talk." They already were. For a second, anger flashed in his face. Then his wife called his name sharply, and he turned away. Grace saw the exchange. Her tears slowed. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing worth carrying." She wiped her cheeks with careful fingers, trying not to smear the makeup someone had painted onto her for a life she was no longer entering. "I cannot go back to the reception," she said. "You do not have to. My apartment is full of gifts, flowers, Caleb's things, my dress bag." Her voice thinned. "I do not know where to go." I should have called someone. Her mother, a friend, a hotel. Any reasonable man would have done that. Instead, I thought of the small wooden house at the edge of the city, the one with the tired bones and the loyal heart, the one I had avoided finishing for 7 years because every room still belonged to a ghost. "You can stay at my place tonight," I said. "Only if you want. Your mother can come too. Or I can drive you somewhere else." Grace looked at me carefully. Even in pain, she was still wise enough to measure danger. I respected her for that. "I trust you," she said. Those 3 words landed harder than any declaration of love could have. Her mother hesitated, but Grace touched her arm. "I cannot breathe around all these people right now. I just need somewhere quiet." So that was how I drove a runaway bride through Charleston in my old blue pickup truck. She sat beside me in silence, her wedding dress gathered awkwardly around her. The veil was folded in her lap. People on the sidewalk stared when we stopped at a red light near King Street. A horse carriage rolled past. Tourists pointed at pastel houses and iron balconies, unaware that beside them, someone's future had collapsed between one heartbeat and the next. I kept both hands on the wheel. Grace looked out the window at the cobblestone streets, the gas lanterns, the flower boxes spilling color from old brick walls. "I used to love this city," she said softly. "You will again." She turned toward me. "How do you know?" I watched the light change. "Because it was never the city that betrayed you." She said nothing after that, but she did not look away from the window. My house sat beyond the most photographed parts of Charleston, down a narrow road where the houses grew farther apart and the marsh grass shivered in the wind. The live oak stood in the front yard, its long branches heavy with Spanish moss. The porch sagged at one corner. The white paint had peeled in strips. One upstairs window was still boarded from the fire. Grace stepped out of the truck and looked at it. "It is beautiful," she said. I almost told her the truth, that it was not beautiful, that it was half burned, half repaired, and full of things I had never learned how to face. Instead, I said, "It needs work." She looked at the oak tree. Most beautiful things do. Inside, the house smelled of pine boards, old smoke, and lemon oil. I had repaired the kitchen first because a man had to eat somewhere. Then the bathroom, the front room, and the porch. The hallway still needed sanding. The upstairs was mostly storage. At the end of the hall, one door remained closed. Grace noticed it immediately. I saw her eyes pause there, but she did not ask. I showed her the bedroom. It had a brass bed, a quilt my grandmother had made, and curtains that did not match. "You can sleep here. I will take the porch." "No," she said quickly. "I cannot take your room." "You can." "Ethan, you do not have to keep rescuing me." I stood in the doorway, unsure how to answer. "I am not rescuing you," I said finally. "I'm giving you a room." "There is a difference." Her eyes filled again, but she blinked the tears back. "I do not know how to be grateful without feeling guilty." "You do not owe me guilt either." That was the first time she looked at me as if she truly saw me. Not the man from the workshop, not the stranger who had stood up in a church, just Ethan, awkward and tired and trying to do one decent thing without asking for payment. She nodded. "Thank you." That night, Grace changed out of her wedding dress in the bedroom while I made tea in the kitchen. Her mother came by with a small overnight bag and stayed until Grace convinced her she would be all right. I saw the worry in Mrs. Bennett's eyes when she looked at me, and I did not blame her. The world had given her daughter enough reasons not to trust men. Before she left, she pulled me aside on the porch. "My daughter is not strong right now," she said. "I know. She may think she owes you something." "She does not." Mrs. Bennett searched my face. "And what do you want from her?" The honest answer was dangerous. I wanted Grace to stop hurting. I wanted Caleb Morrison to feel 1 ounce of the shame he had given her. I wanted to know what her laugh sounded like when it was not carrying sadness underneath. I wanted things I had no right to want. So, I gave the only answer that mattered. I want her to be safe. Mrs. Bennett nodded, though not fully satisfied. "Then keep your word." "I will." After she left, I found Grace sitting at the kitchen table in one of my old flannel shirts and a pair of sweatpants her mother had brought. Her hair was loose now, falling around her tired face. Without the dress, without the veil, without the flowers, she looked younger, smaller, more real. The wedding dress hung over the back of a chair like a wounded animal. "I do not know what to do with it," she said. "You do not have to decide tonight." "I do not know what to do with anything." I set a mug of tea in front of her. "Then do nothing tonight." She stared into the cup. "Everyone saw." "Yes." "Everyone knows." "Probably." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "Tomorrow they will talk." "Yes." "You are not very comforting." "I am trying not to lie." To my surprise, she laughed. It was small and broken, but it was real. Then the laugh turned into tears. She folded forward at my kitchen table and cried like someone who had finally reached a locked room inside herself and opened it. I stood there for a moment, helpless. Then I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. I did not touch her. I did not tell her it would be all right. People had said that to me after Olivia died, and I had hated them for it, so I just stayed. The rain came after midnight, soft at first, then steady against the porch roof. Grace cried until she had no strength left. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were red, and her voice was almost gone. "Why did you stand up?" she asked. The question had been waiting for me all day. I looked toward the dark hallway, toward the closed door at the end of it. Because once, I said, someone I loved needed me, and I could not reach her in time. Grace went very still. I had not said Olivia's name aloud to anyone in months, maybe longer. "I am sorry," Grace whispered. I nodded. "Me too." She did not ask for details. That was Grace's gift. She knew when a wound had only enough air for one sentence. Later, I gave her the bedroom and took the porch. The old wicker lounge chair creaked under my weight, and the rain misted through the screen. I lay awake listening to the house settle. The oak branches scraped softly against the roof, and Grace moving once or twice behind the closed bedroom door. Near dawn, when the rain had stopped and the world smelled washed clean, I heard her crying again. I did not go in. Respect was not only standing beside someone in public. Sometimes it was staying outside a door and letting them grieve without an audience. By morning, the first rumor had already reached us. Grace came into the kitchen holding her phone with both hands. Her face was pale again, but this time there was anger beneath the hurt. "What is it?" I asked. She turned the screen toward me. A message from an unknown number filled the display. "Everyone knows you and the Carpenter planned this. Caleb deserved better than being humiliated by you." Below it was a photograph from the church steps. Grace in her wedding dress. Me beside her. Our hands joined. A private act of mercy had already been turned into evidence. Grace stared at the photograph on her phone as if it belonged to a stranger. In it, she stood on the church steps in her mother's wedding dress, her face pale but lifted, her fingers wrapped around mine. The wind had caught the edge of her veil. The white flowers behind us looked almost celebratory, as though the camera had not captured the wreckage of a life, but the beginning of something planned and beautiful. That was the cruelty of photographs. They could lie without changing a single detail. "They are saying I cheated on him," Grace whispered. I took the phone carefully, not because I wanted to read more, but because her hands were shaking so badly, I was afraid she might drop it. There were more messages, some from unknown numbers, some from people she knew well enough to hurt her. One said Caleb's family was devastated by Grace's betrayal. Another said everyone had noticed the way the carpenter looked at her. Another asked how long she had been sneaking around before the wedding. I felt heat rise in my chest. "None of this is true," I said. Grace gave a short, bitter laugh. "Truth does not travel as fast as gossip." I looked at the screen again. "Caleb's family is doing this." "I know." "You should tell people what he wrote." She looked away. "I cannot." "Grace, I know I should want to defend myself." Her voice cracked. "But every time I think about showing that message, every time I imagine people reading his words, I feel like I am standing in that church again. I feel like I am holding my own humiliation up for everyone to inspect." I understood that too well. People think pain becomes smaller when explained. Sometimes it only becomes more public. I set the phone face down on the table. Then do not answer today. What if silence makes them believe it? Let them believe whatever keeps them entertained until the next scandal. She looked at me. "That sounds lonely." "It is." The word came out before I could soften it. Grace studied me for a moment, and I realized how much I had revealed in that single syllable. Loneliness had become so ordinary to me that I no longer knew how to hide its shape. She did not press. She only pulled the sleeves of my old flannel shirt over her hands and looked toward the window where morning light touched the wet branches of the live oak. "I have to go back to my apartment," she said. "I can drive you." "No, I mean, yes, I would appreciate that, but I have to do more than pick up clothes." She swallowed. "I have to face the things waiting there." So after breakfast, I drove her back into Charleston. Her apartment was above a small bakery near Queen Street. The woman who owned the bakery opened the door when she saw Grace, then immediately wrapped her in a hug that smelled like sugar and warm bread. "Oh, honey," she murmured, "do not you listen to any of them." Grace closed her eyes, and for the first time that morning, some of the hardness left her shoulders. Inside the apartment, Caleb was everywhere. His suit jacket hung over the back of a chair. His law books sat on the coffee table. A pair of polished shoes waited neatly by the door. There were wedding gifts stacked against one wall, wrapped in silver paper and tied with ribbons that looked suddenly foolish. A framed engagement photo stood on a shelf. Caleb smiling. Grace leaning into him, his hand displayed on her waist as if she were something he had acquired. Grace walked to the shelf and turned the photo face down. "I thought he loved me," she said quietly. I stayed by the door. "I know." "No, Ethan." She shook her head. "I thought he loved the real me. The teacher who comes home tired with marker on her hands. The woman who burns toast and forgets to water plants and cries at children's choir concerts. But I think he loved how I looked beside him. Gentle, respectable, easy to introduce." Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, as if naming the truth gave her something solid to stand on. "He did not want a wife," she said. "He wanted a witness to his success." I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. Grace packed slowly, clothes first, then school papers, then a small wooden box filled with letters from students. She left the wedding gifts where they were. When she came to the closet, she found Caleb's garment bag hanging beside her coats. For a long moment, she looked at it. Then she took it down, carried it to the hallway, and placed it outside her apartment door. It was not dramatic. It was not loud, but it was the first act of survival I saw from her. By noon, we had returned to the house beneath the oak tree. Grace carried her own bags inside, despite my offer to help. She chose the smaller guest room upstairs instead of my bedroom, saying she could not keep pushing me out of my own life. I did not argue. There was a firmness in her voice I had not heard before. Over the next few days, Charleston did what small communities do best. It embroidered. By Monday, the rumor had become that Grace and I had been in love for months. By Wednesday, someone claimed I had threatened Caleb. By Friday, Caleb's mother had told 3 charity committees that her son had been forced to protect his future from a woman who was not who she pretended to be. Grace heard all of it. She stopped going to the grocery store after a woman near the produce section whispered, "That is her," just loud enough to be cruel. She stopped answering calls except from her mother and the school principal. She sat on the porch in the evenings with a blanket around her shoulders, watching Spanish moss move in the wind, as if the world beyond the yard had become too sharp to enter. I fixed furniture. That was what I knew how to do. While Grace carried grief through the house like a cup filled too high, I planed boards, repaired joints, stripped old varnish, and tried not to notice how quiet she had become. One afternoon, she came into the workshop behind the house and found me repairing Captain Rockwell again. One of the children had carved a crooked star into the seat, and Grace had asked before the wedding if I could smooth the edges without erasing it. "I forgot about that," she said. I ran my thumb over the little star. "I thought the chair deserved to come home eventually." She came closer. "You kept the star." "Of course. Most people would sand it away. Most people want old things to look new." I reached for a cloth. "I think they should look loved." Grace looked at me then. Really looked, and something in her expression softened. "Is that what you do with all broken things?" she asked. "When I can." "And when you cannot?" I thought of the closed room in the house, the blackened floorboards, the wall studs I had never replaced, Olivia's name folded into ash, and silence. "Then I closed the door," I said. Grace heard the truth beneath it. Her eyes moved toward the house, then back to me. "Ethan," she said gently, "what happened to her?" My hands stilled. For 7 years, Olivia had existed in my life as a presence without a story. People knew the outline: a fiancé, a fire, a funeral. They knew enough to pity me, and not enough to understand me. Grace waited. She did not move closer. She did not touch my arm. She gave me the choice. So I told her. Her name was Olivia Reed, I said. She was 28. She taught art classes at the community center. She wanted chickens, even though we lived too close to the city, and I told her the neighbors would complain. She collected blue glass bottles and said every sad room needed something that could catch light. Grace listened without interrupting. "We bought this house because she loved it. I thought it was too damaged. She said damaged was not the same as finished." I looked down at my hands. We were working on the back room one evening. There was old wiring in the wall. Bad wiring. I thought I had shut off the right breaker. My throat tightened. I had not. The workshop seemed to shrink around us. Outside, cicadas buzzed in the heat. The fire moved faster than I thought fire could move. I got thrown back when part of the wall sparked. Olivia was in the room. I tried to get to her, but the smoke. I stopped, breathed, tried again. I could hear her coughing. Then I could not. Grace's face had gone pale with compassion, but not pity. I was grateful for the difference. "I woke up outside," I said. "A neighbor had pulled me through a window. I kept trying to go back in. They held me down. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Grace whispered, 'You have been blaming yourself all this time.' It was my job to know the wiring. It was the fault of the wiring. I should have checked twice. 'You were building a home,' she said. 'You were not setting a trap.'" The words struck something so deep in me that I had to turn away. I had heard versions of it before, from fire investigators, from my sister, from men at church who did not know what to do with my grief. But from Grace, the words did not sound like comfort. They sounded like a door being unlocked. A week later, the letter arrived. It came in a yellow envelope decorated with stickers of stars, apples, and crooked little hearts. Grace found it in the mailbox on a morning when she had not slept well. Her hair was tied in a loose knot. She wore one of her own sweaters now, soft green, with a small tear near the cuff. The envelope was addressed in large, careful letters. Miss Bennett. Grace opened it at the kitchen table. I was making coffee, pretending not to watch, when her hand flew to her mouth. "What is it?" I asked. She slid the paper toward me. The letter was written in pencil. "Dear Miss Bennett, my mom said grown-ups are being mean and saying things that are not true. I do not like that. You taught us not to be ashamed when someone is mean to us. You said if we did not do something wrong, we should not carry someone else's bad behavior like a backpack. I miss you. Captain Rockwell misses you too. Love. Lily Harper." At the bottom, Lily had drawn a picture of Grace standing beside a giant chair with a crown on it. Grace pressed the letter to her chest and began to cry. But these tears were different. They did not bend her forward. They lifted something out of her. "I said that," she whispered. "I told them that after Marcus got teased for his glasses." I sat across from her. "Sounds like good advice." She laughed through tears. "I should listen to myself. That is usually harder than teaching children." Grace wiped her face, then read the letter again. And again. By the third time, her shoulders had changed. Not healed, not whole, but less defeated. That afternoon, she called the school principal. Her voice shook at first, but I heard it steady as she spoke from the porch. "Yes, I would like to come back next week." A pause. "No, I will not be hiding." Another pause. "I understand there may be parents with questions. They can ask me directly, but I will not let gossip decide whether I am worthy of teaching children." When she hung up, she stood there, looking out at the oak tree. I was near the steps, sanding a piece of trim. "You're going back," I said. She nodded. "I am going back." "Good." She looked at me. "Are you proud of me?" The question was so open, so unguarded, that it almost hurt. "Yes," I said. "Very." Her eyes shone, but she smiled. The following Monday, I drove her to school because her car was still parked near the church and she was not ready to retrieve it. She wore a navy dress, low heels, and a small gold necklace. No ring. Her hands looked bare but not empty. Outside the school, a few parents turned to stare. One woman whispered to another. Grace saw them. I know she did. For a moment, she remained seated in my truck. "You do not have to prove anything today," I said. She looked at the front doors, where children's artwork covered the windows in bright paper suns and rainbows. "Yes, I do," she said softly, "but not to them." Then she opened the door. Before she could take 3 steps, Lily Harper came running across the sidewalk with her backpack bouncing behind her. "Miss Bennett!" Grace crouched just in time for Lily to throw both arms around her neck. Other children followed. One by one, then all at once, they surrounded her, talking over each other, telling her about spelling tests, lost teeth, a class hamster escape, and how Captain Rockwell had been very lonely. Grace laughed. It was the first full laugh I had heard from her since the apple pie months ago. I watched from the truck, one hand on the steering wheel, and felt something in my chest ache in a way that was not entirely painful. That evening, she came home carrying a stack of drawings from her students. She spread them across the kitchen table like treasures. There were pictures of chairs, hearts, classrooms, rainbows, and one very dramatic drawing of Caleb as a dragon being chased by a teacher holding a ruler. "I did not encourage that one," Grace said quickly. I raised an eyebrow. "Of course not," she smiled. "Maybe a little." We ate soup from chipped bowls and read every note. Rain tapped against the windows. The house creaked. For the first time in years, it did not feel empty. Later that night, Grace stood in the hallway before the closed door. I found her there when I came in from the workshop. She did not touch the knob. "I was thinking," she said carefully, "about what Olivia said, that every sad room needs something that can catch light." I could not answer. Grace turned to me. "What if it did?" My chest tightened. "Grace, I am not asking you to erase her. I know. And I am not asking to go in tonight." The hallway felt too narrow, the house too quiet. She looked at the door with such tenderness that I almost hated her for it. Not because she was wrong, but because some part of me was tired of guarding a tomb and terrified of finding out who I would be without it. "What are you asking?" I said. Grace met my eyes. What if the room became something that would have made her happy? I looked at the closed door. For 7 years, I had believed leaving that room untouched was loyalty. The burned walls, the sealed windows, the smell I imagined more than smelled anymore. I had told myself that grief had to be preserved to be honest. But that night, with children's drawings covering the kitchen table and rain washing the dark glass of the windows, another thought came. Maybe love was not a room left ruined. Maybe love was what you built from the part that survived. For 3 days, I did not open the door. Grace did not ask again. That was one of the things that made it harder to ignore her words. She did not push. She did not turn my grief into a project. She did not move through my house with the bright, eager determination of someone who believed love meant fixing everything quickly. She simply left the idea where I could see it. A sad room could catch light. Those words followed me into the workshop, into my sleep, into the silent places where Olivia still lived. I heard them while scraping old varnish off a cherrywood desk. I heard them while walking past the end of the hallway. I heard them one evening when Grace came home with a bag of groceries and a tired smile, and the house felt warmer just because she had stepped into it. She had been back at school for 2 weeks by then. The gossip had not disappeared, but it had begun to lose its teeth. People still stared sometimes. A few parents requested meetings with the principal. One mother asked Grace, in a voice sweet enough to rot fruit, whether her personal situation might distract from teaching. Grace looked her in the eye and said, "My personal situation has taught me more about kindness and courage than any textbook ever could. Your child is safe in my classroom." The mother did not know what to do with that. I only heard the story later, while Grace chopped carrots at the kitchen counter and tried not to look proud of herself. "You should have seen her face," she said. "I wish I had." Grace smiled. "No, you would have stood in the corner looking grim and made everyone nervous." "I do not look grim." She tilted her head. I set down my spoon. "Fine. Maybe I look a little grim." "A little?" It was the kind of teasing that slips into a house quietly and changes the weather inside it. We learned each other in small ways. Grace learned that I drank coffee too strong and forgot lunch when I was working, so she started leaving sandwiches wrapped in wax paper on the edge of my workbench, each one labeled with a sticky note. "Eat this before it becomes furniture." I learned that she hummed when she graded papers and talked to plants as if they were shy children. She bought 2 pots of marigolds for the front porch and apologized to them whenever she forgot to water them. We ate dinner together most nights, though neither of us ever called it that. She would cook soup, or I would make eggs and toast, or we would sit on the porch with paper cartons from the little Thai place near her school. We talked about ordinary things, her students, my clients, the weather, the stubborn leak above the pantry. We did not talk about Caleb unless we had to. We did not talk about love at all. But love, I was beginning to learn, did not always enter a room with a declaration. Sometimes it came as an extra blanket left on the porch chair. Sometimes as a hand on the back of a kitchen chair, steadying it before someone sat down. Sometimes as silence that did not feel empty. One night, I came home from delivering a restored table and found Grace in the kitchen with a pot on the stove and worry in her eyes. "You look terrible," she said. "Thank you." "I mean it, Ethan. I am tired." "You are sweating." "It is Charleston. It is November." I tried to argue, but the room tilted. The next thing I knew, Grace had one hand on my arm and the other against my forehead. "You're burning up." "I'm fine." "You are absolutely not fine. Sit down." There was a tone teachers use when they have successfully faced 27 children with glue sticks. I obeyed. Grace made me soup, found medicine in the bathroom cabinet, and put a cool cloth on my forehead while I sat on the couch feeling both embarrassed and strangely peaceful. I had not been taken care of in so long that I had forgotten how uncomfortable tenderness could be. "You do not have to do all this," I muttered. She sat beside the couch, tucking her legs beneath her. "I know. I mean it. So do I." I closed my eyes. "You are very stubborn. I teach 2nd grade. Stubborn is my native language." I would have laughed if my head had not been pounding. That night, fever loosened something in me. I drifted in and out of sleep, hearing rain on the roof, Grace moving softly through the house, the kettle whistling, the old floorboards answering her steps. At some point, I woke and thought I smelled smoke. Panic took me by the throat. I sat up too fast, knocking the cloth from my forehead. "Olivia!" Grace was there instantly. "Ethan, Ethan, look at me." The room swam. I could not breathe. For one terrible second, I was back in the fire, back in the heat and black air, back in the moment when love became a voice I could not reach. Grace knelt in front of me, not touching my face until I focused on her. "There is no smoke," she said. "You are in the front room. It is raining. You have a fever. You are safe." My hands were shaking. She picked up one of them carefully, not the scarred hand as if she knew that might be too much, but the other. She held it between both of hers. "Breathe with me," she said. I tried. Again. The rain came back first, then the smell of soup, then the lamplight, then Grace. I looked down at our hands. "I'm sorry. Do not apologize for a nightmare." I said her name. "I know." I could not look at her. "That must be strange for you." "Why?" "Because you are here." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Ethan, I do not need you to pretend you did not love someone before me." Before me. The words were soft, careful. They hung in the air between us, and both of us heard what they almost meant. Grace seemed to realize it at the same time I did. Her cheeks colored, but she did not take the words back. I swallowed hard. Grace. She looked at me then, and there was fear in her eyes, but not the kind that runs away, the kind that stands at the edge of something honest. "I am not ready," she whispered. "I know. I do not even know what I feel some days. That is all right. I am grateful to you. I am safe with you. I care about you. But I do not want to confuse rescue with love." My chest ached, but there was also relief in it. She was naming the thing I had been afraid to name. "I do not want that either," I said. Her fingers tightened around mine. "And Olivia—" "She was my past," I said quietly. "But I do not know how to make room for a future without feeling like I am leaving her behind." Grace's eyes filled. "Maybe you are not leaving her. Maybe you are carrying what she taught you into another room." Another room. The next morning, after the fever broke, I stood at the end of the hallway for almost 10 minutes. Grace was at school. The house was still. Sunlight lay in pale strips across the floorboards. I held the key in my palm, though the door had not been locked in years. I had only kept it closed. That, I realized, had been the real lock. My hand shook when I turned the knob. The smell hit me first. Not smoke exactly. Time had thinned that away. It was more the memory of smoke, trapped in old wood and plaster, mixed with dust and heat, and the sourness of something abandoned too long. The room was smaller than I remembered. The back wall had been blackened around the place where the wiring failed. One window was boarded over. The floorboards near the corner were charred and uneven. A broken sawhorse leaned against the wall. A rusted paint can sat where I had left it the week before Olivia died. On the floor, half covered in dust, was a blue glass bottle. I bent and picked it up. It was cracked down one side, but when I carried it to the doorway, it caught the sunlight. I sat on the floor and cried for the first time in 2 years. Not the kind of tears that tear a man apart. Not the kind that come with guilt sharp enough to kill. These were quieter, older, like rain finally reaching a place that had been dry too long. When Grace came home, she found the door open. She stood at the hallway entrance and did not step inside. "You opened it," she said. I nodded. "Are you all right?" "No." She waited. "But I think I might be someday." Grace pressed one hand to her heart. "That is enough for today." A week later, we began cleaning the room. Not every day, not quickly. Some evenings I could only stand in the doorway. Some days I worked for hours, tearing out ruined boards, removing rusted nails, scraping blackened plaster. Grace wore old jeans and tied a scarf over her hair. She carried debris out in small buckets and never complained, even when dust streaked her face. We found strange little relics of a life interrupted. A paintbrush stiff with dried white paint, a list Olivia had written on the back of an envelope, curtains, porch swing, lemon tree. "Ask Ethan about chickens again." Grace smiled at that one through tears. "She was persistent," she said. "She was impossible." "You loved that." "Yes," I said. I did. For the first time, speaking about Olivia in front of Grace did not feel like betrayal. It felt like letting two parts of my life stand in the same room without fighting each other. One Saturday afternoon, Grace arrived with a stack of children's books from a library sale. I stared at them. "What are those?" "Possibilities." "That is a lot of possibilities." She placed them on the cleared windowsill. "I was thinking, there are children in my class who do not have many books at home. Some of them stay after school because the library feels safer than their apartments. What if this room became a little reading room? Not officially, not a business, Just a place where children could come with their parents on Saturday mornings, read, draw, feel welcome. I looked around at the room that had once held fire, death, and everything I could not forgive myself for. A library, I said. A small one. For children. For anyone who needs a quiet place. The blue bottle sat on the windowsill now, its crack turned toward the light. I thought of Olivia teaching art classes. Olivia wanting sad rooms to catch light. Olivia laughing as she wrote chickens on the list I had told her to throw away. She would have liked that, I said. Grace's face softened. I hope so. So we built it. I replaced the burned floorboards with reclaimed heart pine. Grace painted the walls a warm cream color that made the room look larger than it was. I built low shelves from salvaged oak. She labeled baskets by hand: adventure, animals, fairy tales, feelings, rainy day books. On the first Saturday of December, Lily Harper arrived with her mother and a plate of cookies. She stepped into the room, looked around, and whispered, "It smells like stories." Grace laughed, and I had to look away because the sound filled every empty place in the house. More children came after that. Not many at first. 4 one week, 7 the next. They sat on rugs, sprawled on cushions, read aloud in halting voices, and asked questions with the fearless honesty only children possess. "Mr. Walker, why do you have a scar?" "Because I was careless near something hot." Grace looked up sharply from across the room, but I gave her a small nod. A boy named Marcus touched the new bookshelf. "Did you build this?" "I did." "Can broken wood become good again?" I looked at Grace. She was watching me with tears in her eyes. "Yes," I said. "Most of the time, it can." By Christmas, the room had a name. The children called it the light room because of the blue bottles Grace hung in the window. When the afternoon sun came through them, patches of blue moved across the floor like pieces of sky. That should have been the season when peace found us and stayed. But men like Caleb Morrison do not return because they understand what they lost. They return when the world stops applauding them. It happened in January. Grace and I had been planting winter pansies in the beds along the porch, though I had told her it was too cold, and she had told me flowers deserved optimism. Her hands were covered in dirt. Mine were numb. We were arguing softly about whether the yellow ones should go near the steps when a black car pulled into the driveway. Grace went still. I knew before the door opened. Caleb stepped out wearing a wool coat that probably cost more than my truck. He looked thinner than he had at the church, less polished around the eyes, but his smile was still perfectly practiced. "Grace," he said, as if he had found her after a small misunderstanding. She stood slowly. I set the trowel down. Caleb glanced at me, then at the house, then at the flowers. Something like disgust passed over his face before he covered it. "I was hoping we could talk," he said. Grace wiped her hands on her jeans. "You can say what you came to say from there." His smile tightened. "I think we deserve privacy." "No," she said. "You gave up privacy when you left me in a church with a text message." For the first time, Caleb's confidence flickered. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart turned cold. "Grace," he said softly, stepping closer. "I made a mistake." She did not move. "New York was not what I expected," he continued. "The position fell through. There were complications. I was under pressure. I handled things badly." "Badly," Grace repeated. "I know I hurt you." "You humiliated me." "Yes." He lowered his head in a way that looked rehearsed. "And I will regret that for the rest of my life." I stayed silent. Every instinct in me wanted to step between them. Every old wound in me wanted to protect her from hearing one more polished lie. But love built on control is only another kind of cage. Grace had to choose her own door. Caleb opened the velvet box. Inside was her engagement ring. "I want to make it right," he said. "Come back to me. We can tell everyone the truth became confused in the emotion of the day. My family will help smooth things over. We can still have the life we planned." Grace stared at the ring. I saw the memory move through her. The church, the dress, the whispers, the little girl reaching from the pew, my hand offered in the aisle, the long nights after, the classroom, the letter, the room that learned to breathe. Caleb mistook her silence for weakness. He stepped closer. "Grace, Look around you, he said, lowering his voice. This is not your life. You are living in a half-repaired house with a man who fixes chairs. You belong beside someone who can give you security, respect, a future. Something inside me went very quiet. Grace looked at him then, and her voice, when it came, was calm enough to end things forever. You still think respect is something people see from the outside. Caleb stared at Grace as if she had spoken in a language he did not understand. For most of his life, people had received his words the way he intended them. Judges listened, clients trusted, friends laughed on cue. Women smiled when he turned that polished charm toward them. He knew how to make an apology sound noble without allowing it to cost him too much. But Grace was no longer standing in the old church with a bouquet shaking in her hands. She was standing in the dirt beside a half-repaired porch with soil on her jeans, wind in her hair, and a steadiness in her eyes that had taken months of pain to earn. Caleb closed the ring box slowly. "You're angry. I understand that." "No," Grace said. "You understand inconvenience. You understand embarrassment. You understand losing control of the story. You do not understand what you did to me." His jaw tightened. "I said I was sorry. You said you handled things badly. I was trying to be honest." Grace gave a small, sad smile. "No, Caleb, you were trying to make cruelty sound like pressure." I stood a few feet behind her, my hands at my sides, every muscle in my body rigid with the effort of doing nothing. It would have been easy to step forward, easy to tell him to leave, easy to become the kind of man who mistook possession for protection. But Grace did not need a shield in that moment. She needed a witness. Caleb glanced at me, irritation breaking through his polished expression. "Are you really going to let him stand here while we discuss our future?" Grace turned her head slightly, not enough to look at me, only enough to make it clear she knew I was there. "There is no our future," she said. The words moved through the yard like a clean wind. Caleb's face changed, not into grief, into anger. "You are throwing away everything," he said. "For what? A wounded carpenter and a room full of children's books?" Grace did not flinch. "I am choosing a life where I do not have to shrink to make a man feel tall." For a second, Caleb looked as if he might say something ugly enough to expose himself completely. Then he remembered who he was supposed to be. His shoulders straightened, his mouth flattened into a cold line. "You will regret this." Grace wiped one last bit of dirt from her palm. "I already regret the years I spent mistaking your approval for love. I will not regret leaving it behind." Caleb looked at me again. "And you." Nothing to say. I met his eyes. She already said it. His face hardened. Then he turned, got into his car, and drove away, leaving 2 faint tracks in the damp gravel. Grace stood still until the sound of the engine disappeared down the road. Only then did her shoulders begin to shake. I stepped closer, but stopped before touching her. "Grace?" She turned toward me, and the tears came all at once. Not helpless tears, not the kind that belong to humiliation. These were the tears of a woman who had just handed back the last piece of a life that no longer fit. "I thought it would feel better," she whispered. "Letting go usually hurts before it frees you." She laughed through the tears. "You always say things like old furniture taught you philosophy." Old furniture has seen a lot. That made her cry harder and smile at the same time. I opened my arms slowly, giving her the choice. She stepped into them. For months, I had been careful with Grace, careful not to hold too long, careful not to let my heart speak louder than her healing. But that afternoon, beneath the live oak, she held on to me as if she had reached the end of a long storm and found something solid still standing. I rested my cheek against her hair. "You did it," I said. "No," she whispered. "We did." I closed my eyes. "Grace, I need you to be sure." She pulled back just enough to look at me. "I am sure I do not love Caleb," she said. "I am sure I do not want the life he offered, and I am sure that when I imagine tomorrow, I look for you in it." My breath caught. She touched the scar on my left hand with 2 careful fingers. It was the first time she had ever done that. Not by accident, not in fear, not as a question. "I am not choosing you because you saved me at the church," she said. "I am choosing you because you stayed after, because you let me fall apart without making me feel broken, because you gave me a room and never asked for my heart as rent." My voice was rough when I answered, "I love you." Her eyes filled again, but this time the tears carried light. "I love you too, Ethan." The kiss did not come like thunder. It came softly, almost shyly, as if both of us understood that some doors should open with reverence. Her hands rested against my chest. Mine stayed at her back. The winter air smelled of soil, salt, and the faint sweetness of the pansies she had insisted on planting. When we pulled apart, Grace smiled through tears. "Do you think the yellow ones should go by the steps?" she asked. I stared at her. Then I laughed. It surprised both of us. The sound came from somewhere I had thought the fire had destroyed. Grace laughed too, and soon we were standing in the yard like two fools, crying and laughing over flowers while the old house watched us with its tired bones and loyal heart. After Caleb left, the rumors began to die. Not because people became kinder. People rarely surrender gossip out of virtue. They surrendered it because Grace stopped bleeding where they could see. She returned to school each day with her head high. She answered questions simply. She refused to hide Ethan Walker from her life, and she refused to explain him as if love required a public defense. When someone asked whether she and I had been involved before the wedding, she said, "No. But he showed me more honor in one terrible hour than Caleb did in all our engagement." That sentence traveled through Charleston faster than the lies had. Caleb's family tried to repair their reputation. They hosted dinners. They donated money. They spoke carefully about misunderstanding, stress, and unfortunate timing. But people had seen grace in that church. They had seen Caleb's empty place at the altar. Some truths do not need to shout. They only need to remain standing. Spring came slowly to Charleston. The marsh grass brightened. The air turned soft. The cobblestone streets shone after afternoon rain. The cafe near my workshop began setting little tables outside again, and Grace sometimes met me there after school. She would arrive with a canvas bag full of papers to grade, order tea, and pretend not to steal pieces of my blueberry scone. At the workshop, I repaired the old classroom chair again after Marcus and another boy tried to use it as a pirate ship. Grace apologized on behalf of the entire second grade. "They have vision," I said, turning the chair upside down on my bench. "They have no fear and very little balance." That is usually how ships are built. She leaned against the doorway, smiling. "What?" I asked. "Nothing." "That never means nothing." She looked around the workshop at the curls of wood on the floor, the tools lined neatly on the wall, the afternoon light across my bench. "I used to bring broken things here," she said. "You still do?" "Yes, but now I know why they always left better than they came in." I looked down at the chair so she would not see what that did to me. The light room became part of the neighborhood by accident. At first, only Grace's students came with their parents on Saturdays. Then a grandmother from church brought her grandson. Then a single father from down the road asked if his daughter could borrow books because the public library was too far to reach without a car. Grace made sign-out cards from old index paper. I built more shelves. Someone donated bean bags. Someone else brought crayons, puzzles, and a small rug shaped like a map of the world. Lily Harper declared herself assistant librarian and took the role very seriously. "No running in the light room," she announced one Saturday, standing with her hands on her hips while two boys froze mid-chase. "Books get nervous." Grace bit her lip to keep from laughing. I failed completely. By April, the once-burned room was the brightest part of the house. Blue bottles hung in the window. Children's drawings covered the walls. Olivia's old list was framed in a simple wooden frame I had made myself. At Grace's suggestion, we added a small brass plaque beneath it for Olivia Reed, who believed sad rooms could catch light. The day I hung it, I stood in front of the wall for a long time. Grace came beside me and slipped her hand into mine. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "but not the way it used to." She rested her head on my shoulder. That was how healing happened for us. Not in one grand moment, not in a miracle. It happened in small permissions. To laugh, to remember, to be angry, to plant flowers, to open doors, to love again without asking the past to disappear. In May, I asked Grace to marry me. I did not do it in a restaurant or on a crowded street. I did not hide a ring in dessert or arrange candles in the shape of a heart. Grace had already had one proposal designed for everyone else to admire. I wanted this one to belong only to her. It was a rainy evening, the kind that turned the porch screens silver and made the whole house smell like wet wood and tea. Grace was sitting on the floor of the lightroom, sorting donated books into piles. Her hair was falling loose from its clip. There was a smudge of blue marker on her wrist from school. I stood in the doorway for a minute, watching her place a battered copy of Charlotte's Web into the animals basket. She looked up. "Why are you standing there like that?" I had planned words, good ones, careful ones. But when the moment came, they scattered. So I knelt in front of her and took out the ring. It was not a diamond. I had made it myself from a small piece of charred wood saved from the burned part of the house. I had sealed and polished it until the black grain shone like midnight, then set it inside a thin band of silver. It was simple, imperfect, and unlike anything in a jewelry store window. Grace stared at it, one hand covering her mouth. "This wood came from the room," I said. "For years I thought it was only proof of what I lost. But you helped me understand something. Ash is not only an ending. Sometimes it is the ground where something new begins." Her eyes filled. "I loved Olivia," I said. "I always will, in the way we keep loving people who shaped us. But my future is not behind that closed door anymore. It is here, in this house, in this room, in Saturday mornings with children who think books get nervous, in soup when I am sick, in flowers planted too early, in you." Grace was crying openly now. "I am not asking because I rescued you," I said. "I am asking because you chose yourself, and then somehow, you chose me too. Grace Bennett, will you marry me?" She looked at the ring, then at me. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Ethan." When I slid the ring onto her finger, she touched it as if it were something alive. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is not traditional." "Good." She smiled through tears. "I have had enough of traditional." We were married beneath the live oak in September. There were no society pages, no 200 guests, no towering cake meant to impress people who barely knew us. The chairs were mismatched, borrowed from neighbors. The school, my workshop, and one antique dealer who insisted the whole thing needed character. I repaired every wobbly leg myself. Grace did not wear her mother's wedding dress. She loved her mother too much to let the memory of that first ceremony cling to it forever. Instead, she chose a simple ivory dress with sleeves of soft lace and a skirt that moved easily when she walked. Her mother helped button it in the upstairs bedroom, and later told me Grace did not cry once until Lily Harper knocked on the door and asked if brides were allowed to have emergency cookies. The ceremony took place just before sunset. The old house stood behind us, freshly painted, but still humble, its porch lined with flowers. The light-room windows glowed blue in the late sun. Children sat in the front row, trying very hard to behave and failing in quiet, charming ways. Mrs. Bennett cried before the music even started. My sister came from Savannah with her husband and hugged Grace as if she had been waiting years for my heart to come home. I stood beneath the oak tree in a navy suit Grace had chosen because, according to her, my old gray one looked like it had survived a courtroom and a hurricane. Then she appeared. She walked down the small aisle on her mother's arm carrying wildflowers tied with a ribbon. The sunlight caught her hair. The breeze moved through the Spanish moss above her like a blessing. This time, no one was missing from the altar. This time, no one whispered with pity. This time, when Grace reached me, she smiled like a woman who had crossed fire, gossip, shame, and grief, and found herself still worthy of joy. The minister was the same man from the old seaside church. When he saw us standing together, his eyes shone. "Some promises begin in celebration," he said. "Some begin in sorrow. But the strongest promises are not proven by the day they are spoken. They are proven by the days that follow." Grace squeezed my hands. "I spoke my vows first. I once believed a home was something you built with wood, nails, and careful hands," I said. "Then I lost one before it was finished, and I thought I would never try again. Grace, you taught me that a home is not a place without scars. It is a place where scars are allowed to exist without ruling every room." I promise to stand beside you on bright days and terrible ones. I promise never to mistake your gratitude for obligation or your kindness for weakness. I promise to keep choosing you, not because you need saving, but because loving you has made me brave enough to live." Grace was crying by the time I finished. Then she took a breath and gave me her vows. "Ethan, on the worst day of my life, you did not ask me to smile. You did not ask me to pretend. You only offered me your hand and my dignity. But I did not fall in love with you because you stood up that day. I fell in love with you because you stayed. You stayed when I was angry. You stayed when I was ashamed. You stayed when I did not know who I was without the future I had planned. You gave me space to grieve, and in that space, I found my voice again. I promise to love the man you are, including the parts that still ache. I promise never to compete with your past, but to honor the love that taught you how deeply a heart can care. I promise to build a life with you where broken things are not thrown away, where children are welcome, where sad rooms catch light, and where we both remember that joy is allowed to return." By then, even the children had gone quiet. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, I kissed Grace beneath the oak tree as the guests clapped, cried, and laughed all at once. Lily threw flower petals too late and with far too much force. Marcus shouted, "Captain Rockwell approves," which made everyone laugh so hard the minister had to wipe his eyes. Afterward, we ate dinner on long tables in the yard. There was fried chicken, biscuits, peach cobbler, lemonade, and a small wedding cake made by the baker below Grace's old apartment. Someone played guitar on the porch. Children chased fireflies near the fence. The blue bottles in the light room caught the last of the evening and scattered it across the floor. Grace and I danced in the grass. Neither of us was very good at it. "I should warn you," she said, resting her head against my chest. "I may still cry sometimes." "I know." "And I may get scared." "I know." "And I may burn toast." "I definitely know." She laughed and lifted her face to mine. "And you may work too much, forget lunch, and pretend you are fine when you have a fever." "That sounds like a difficult man." "He is," she said. "But I love him." I held her closer. Across the yard, Mrs. Bennett was talking with my sister. Lily was trying to organize a firefly parade. The old house glowed behind us, repaired but not erased. In the window of the light room, the cracked blue bottle Olivia had loved caught the moonlight. For the first time in years, I did not feel torn between what I had lost and what I had found. Olivia was not gone from me. She was in the patience of my hands, in the room full of color, in the courage it took to love while knowing love could be lost. Caleb was not a shadow over Grace anymore. He was a chapter she had survived, not a name that defined her. And Grace. Grace was not the abandoned bride people had once whispered about in a church. She was my wife. She was a teacher, a gardener of stubborn flowers, a keeper of children's letters, a woman who had learned that shame belongs to the person who causes the wound, not the one left bleeding. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the yard was quiet, Grace and I sat on the porch steps in our wedding clothes. Her shoes were off. My tie was loose. The oak branches moved above us, heavy with Spanish moss and moonlight. She leaned against my shoulder. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not stood up?" she asked. I looked out at the yard, at the mismatched chairs, the fading lanterns, the small white petals scattered in the grass. "Yes," I said. "Sometimes." "What do you think?" "I think you would have found your way eventually." She turned her head. "You do?" "Yes. Maybe not that day. Maybe not that month. But you are stronger than you knew." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I'm glad I did not have to find out alone." I took her hand, the one wearing the ring made from ash and silver. "You never have to be alone again." Grace smiled into the dark. The house creaked behind us, not like something wounded, but like something settling comfortably into itself. From somewhere inside, a stack of children's books shifted and fell with a soft thump. Grace laughed. "The books are nervous." I smiled. The night smelled of salt, flowers, and old wood. And in that small house on the edge of Charleston, beneath a tree that had watched storms come and go for more years than either of us could count, I finally understood what love was. It was not always the person who appeared brightest on the perfect day. Sometimes it was the hand offered in the worst moment. Sometimes it was the person who did not demand to be the reason you healed. Sometimes it was the one who stayed long enough for your heart to believe that happiness could knock twice. And when it did, you were allowed to open the door. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of today's story on Heartfelt Stories Daily. I hope this journey reminded you that even after heartbreak, life can still lead us toward healing, tenderness, and a love that truly stays. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us bring more emotional, romantic, and healing stories to listeners around the world. Do not forget to subscribe to Heartfelt Stories Daily and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, may your heart stay hopeful, your days stay gentle, and your story keep moving toward the light.